I'm still figuring it out. And that's the honest truth. Like I said, my first story took 2 years. I started at the top, if you come up with your tiered list of places you want to submit to, and you can say like, hi, you have your cover letter in which you really agonized how you're going to try and sell yourself without like talking about the story because they're not interested in it. What they want to know is like, where have you been published before? I've been published nowhere. Here's this story, read it. And it's this like, you just have to do it. And you have to go through understanding you're going to get rejections, and you're going to get a lot of them, and it's going to feel like you're being punched in the solar plexus constantly for years. But just keep going, because it's the only way you're going to get stuff out there. It took, I would say, everyone I cared about said no. And then I started to, well, at least I've heard of you. And then they said no. And then I would send it to like places I kind of tangentially, like met. So I'd never really heard very much about Gulf Coast. I think I saw them in one magazine's rack in a bookstore at some point. So they were a name I'd heard but didn't know really very much about the magazine. And I'm really thrilled now that I could put it on my resume as like my first story. They're an amazing magazine. They're an amazing literary journal that does really fantastic work, and they feature a lot of really fantastic writers and host a lot of wonderful contests, and they're a force. I did not know any of that when they finally took the story, and it was because I had a conversation at AWP at one point in time with somebody who is one of the editors at Gulf Coast. They said, yeah, send us this, and then they took it. So I was really, really surprised, and I didn't think they would, because, when I went back after submitting it, I started to learn more about the magazine, and I kind of saw what they were publishing, and I was just like, there's no way they're going to, and I still do that. The story that I sent to One Story, you have to understand, like, you're facing incredible odds every time you submit. They get, it was like that at the New England Review, too. I think they had over 5,000 and some odd submissions in fiction alone for the year. Of that, they'll pick 20 stories, 20 to 25 stories. It's a safe bet is 4 to 5 stories an issue for 4 issues a year. 5,000 down to 20 is incredible long odds against you when it comes to getting a piece placed anywhere. So anytime a magazine says yes, that's a reason for celebration, because publishing something anywhere is a tremendous victory. But it does require that you have to keep putting yourself out there, and it's going to keep happening. So I have stories that will go out, and the one that just got accepted to One Story, it got rejected. I had sent it out in a very limited round. This was my first round. This has never, ever, ever happened to me before, where I sent something out and it got accepted into the first round or the first tier of magazines. Like, I sent it to the Atlantic probably like months ago, but it disappeared off of it fell off of like the top of the filing cabinet down into, the crevice behind I never heard anything back from them. So no. I had also submitted to a top literary journal that I had, I won't name names, but I got a curt, no thank you, we're not interested, about a few weeks before I heard the acceptance from One Story. And a good friend of mine who was a waiter with me and was also on staff this past year at Bread Loaf, he had submitted something like a couple weeks ahead of me, and he'd heard like a month to 2 months before I heard anything that, we're going to have to pass on this one. This is really great work, but it's just not quite right for what we're doing right now. Send us something else in the future. And if you hear that, that's a reason to celebrate too, because at least they're like reaching out to you and saying like, well, we think the work is good, but it's not quite right. So I saw something in my inbox from the editor, and I thought, well, at least it's a nice rejection note, right? Because it's from a named editor, and he's like reaching out to say like, hey, I'm sorry it took this long, which is all I could see like on the byline. But then when I read it was an acceptance, I entered this surreal period. It's like, did this really just happen? Because it was right before Christmas, and so like everybody was on holiday. So it was like weeks before I heard anything sort of like afterwards saying like, yes, I will, like, and, but you're like doubting yourself, like, did that really happen for like into the new year? And then once we were in the process of like trading edits back and forth, then yes, I could sort of settle down a little bit. But yeah, there's a lot, or there's a certain way in which I don't feel anything's really settled until you see the copy edit, the proof, and you get a check with a signed contract. That's when you know like it's for real. But and all of that is a long way of saying like, that's great, I'm right back at it now. I'll have some more stories I've got to finish, and it's right back into like the process of trying to find homes for them. That could take years. I was talking with Phil Cly after he had published Redeployment. He had his first story in a similar vein accepted at Granta, mostly because when he was an MFA student at Hunter, one of his teachers had dinner with one of the editors from Granta. I think it was Jonathan Freeman, and he said like, hey, somehow during the dinner conversation it came up that they were putting together an issue that was dedicated to thinking about it being 10 years after 9/11. And this particular teacher had said to the editor, like, hey, I've got this student who's got this great story. I think it would be perfect. And that's how that all sort of happened. And for him, everything fell into place right after that, because once he had the story in Granta, there were agents who were interested, but he had an editor from Penguin Random House, like, knocking on his door saying, do you have more? And yeah, we'll sign you up. I mean, that is like the ultimate dream story, right? And it mostly doesn't happen like that at all. But he told me that, he had all these other stories that went into the collection, and some of them are really wonderful, and he couldn't find anybody who would publish them. None of them. He got rejections left and right. Nobody would take these stories. And then he ended up winning the National Book Award and made it all a moot point anyways. But, it's weird. I don't understand how it works. I don't think I will ever understand how it works. And, I'm sure that I certainly don't even understand how it all happens with a book yet. I'm just still trying to get stories out now and again, building my case, as it were, saying, like, you should publish this as a book sometime. I just have to be really stubborn and keep going, because it's the only way, like I said, that anything happens.
Have you thought about combining things into a collection at some point?
Yes, but I have thoughts about that. I've always kind of appreciated collections that mirror the best albums, and I don't mean, I can always kind of tell there's a difference between an album that feels like it's just a bunch of songs smattered together and one that feels like it has sort of a thread through them, like a throw. We call it like a concept album. Imagine that. Like Bowie or Radiohead's OK Computer. I've always appreciated collections that felt like the stories within them were talking to each other in some way. And I don't mean that they're necessarily linked stories or it's the same character who keeps showing up. I mean, that's all great too, but those aren't the ones that I really, really gravitate towards. I want to feel like the stories in a way are in conversation with each other without necessarily feeling that they're linked.
Right.
And, I'm beginning to understand how that can happen for me. And that's exciting. That's when, like, hey, this could be a thing, Now I just have to go make other people believe in the thing that I believe in. enough to want to give me a shot.
Yeah.
And then after that, I mean, here's the other funny thing is when something's out in the world, then nothing's up to you anymore. That's out there. It's like you've given birth to a child who's just gone out into the world, and your ownership over them and what other people think of it, it's no longer yours.